Great. Well, good morning. Today is Friday, January 19th, and this morning we have both the Senate and House Transportation Committees meeting in a joint hearing to hear from our state economist, Tom Cavett. And this is following up. I know some of this has, we had the e-board meeting yesterday. And then this morning, I think our committees are very interested to hear from about the revenues specifically as they relate to transportation. And so I'll say for anyone watching on YouTube, we do have an economic review and revenue forecast update. And Mr. Cavett, if you can just direct us to if you're going to be using this presentation or if we should be following along with you, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, I'll probably reference certain page numbers in that. And yeah, that's the document that was distributed yesterday, and all the numbers there are consistent with what was approved at the e-board meeting for budgetary purposes in the coming 2 fiscal years.
Great. So I'll turn it over to you. And how about we let you, how would you like to do this? Do you want to take questions along the way, or would you like to give your presentation and then we
I think questions anytime are fine with me. That's really more the purpose of this. You can read in the report, lots of other stuff, and there's really not time to cover everything in there. I can go way down in the weeds on lots and lots of things, but I'll give just a brief overview and then open it up for Q&A.
That sounds great. That sounds great. I think we have until a little bit before 9:30 before we have to wrap up. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, good.
Or we would just interrupt.
I think
for me, if in the Senate committee, if you can raise your hand, I can see you on the screen and then I can facilitate and call on you. So Senator, does that make sense for my colleagues in the Senate? Okay, great.
Good. Okay. The general economic picture since we did the last official state forecast in July has improved a little bit, slightly. We had been forecasting a slowdown. We're still forecasting a slowdown, but it wasn't, things didn't slow quite as quickly or dramatically as anticipated. So the slowdown is coming from an intentional putting on of the brakes by the Federal Reserve Board via interest rate hikes. And the idea is to slow the economy enough that inflation drops. So inflation's the problem that this is designed to address. And it's, long-standing kind of Federal Reserve tradition in terms of how they work. What's different are a lot of things that have to do with the pandemic that are left over that are making it more complicated and also contributing to the inflation in the first place. So we don't have a traditional set of traditional economic environment within which these interest rates are operating. So there are a lot of unknowns, and the concern always when the Fed's tightening is they're trying to get it just right, tighten just to the point that inflation comes down and then ease up. And very often they overshoot because there are lags involved. So they raise interest rates, but it takes a long time for that to get out into the economy and really slow things down. That's been blunted this time around by massive amounts of wealth and money that have been dispersed in connection with the pandemic and later infrastructure spending. So some of that money's piled up in state coffers and is the source of unprecedented interest income the state's getting. We used to get maybe $1 million or $2 million in interest income a year between the general fund and education fund. That's now $70 to $73 million expected in fiscal 24. And on page 32 of the handout, there's a chart that shows the average state cash balances. And you can see, if you flip to that, since 2004, when that data start, the way that's ramped up to be more than $2 billion in the bank earning interest, invested in various ways. And so that's an offset. When you take this, Vermont's not the only state with these kind of balances that got this money. So when you take that across all the states, there's a lot of dry powder still to be spent. And there also is a growing non-bank sector of the economy that's not regulated and can keep lending around and aside what the Fed's doing. It's also blunting what they're doing to some effect. But the long and short of it is that inflation has come down pretty much as well as could have been expected to this date. It was over 9% in June of 2022. It's dropped in the last 6 months to between 3.7%. There was a reading in November that was 3.1%. And that caused the Fed in December to announce that they would be reducing interest rates sometime in 2024, probably by 325 basis point reductions. They didn't say when they'd start or, there's not a guarantee. They're just flashing a signal. Well, that signal was so welcome. The equity markets became euphoric. Stocks ran up again. Everybody started being super optimistic, but this revived this sense that the soft landing, which is slowing the economy without crashing it, really could be achieved. It's a rarity, but it looked like and it does look like that is a real possibility. There's still a ways to go. Take the analogy a little bit further. The landing of the plane on the tarmac is actually difficult. I have a picture of a tarmac in the review. Just
the American Eagle at one.
What's that?
I was thinking of the American Eagle plane in Rochester that went off the runway.
It can happen. That's all. So I mean, it's not over by a long shot. But anyway, that's looking good. It's just important to remember, anytime you have a forced landing when you're flying in a plane, that's not good news. Even if it's soft and gentle, it's not what you want to be doing. And the sooner you get back up in the air, the better. So this forecast, even though it raises revenue for most categories relative to the July forecast that we made and have been operative since then, still represents a slowdown. In the available general fund, there are 2 consecutive years with declining revenue and better than 4% decline in fiscal 24 still. Now, there are things that could go right that could change that, and we could be surprised on the upside, but there are plenty of things kicking around in the world right now that could go wrong. And when the economy is slowing as it is, and it's slowing very gradually, but when it's closer to the ground, it's much more fragile, much more vulnerable to exogenous shocks like the war in the Middle East and things like that. So stay tuned. But right now, if you look across all 3 funds relative to July, there's a table on page 30, and you see there's total across all 3 funds in fiscal 24, $33.8 million above what had been forecast. Fiscal 25, 13 million above. 26, 16.5 million above. And 27 and 28, 6.5 and $7 million above. So this is a tiny adjustment to a very large base, but it's positive. When you look up above those lines, you'll see, though, that every fund is positive except for the T fund.
Yes, that's that's what we're focused on. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is that's what I want to talk about more. And so year to date, the T fund is lagging, and the weakness is generally in motor vehicle purchase and use and motor vehicle fees. And the fuel taxes have been pretty much spot on. And actually, this year will probably bring in just a little bit more just because of the way the pricing mechanism on the fuel assessment tax works, and the lags that are involved in that. But longer term, a lot of the energy price forecasts have been lowered, and that actually brings in less money, both in that and TIB. So even that has some weakness aside from the structural decline that's occurring in gasoline consumption and therefore tax revenue that we get from that, but not big changes in that. So motor vehicle purchase and use. There are three main issues that are dragging that down. The most important are the high interest rates that have been really hitting hard purchasers. So 80% of new cars are bought with financing, and 40% of used cars are bought with financing. And that financing now is 7 to 8% for new cars. Of course, there's huge range based on credit standing. And typically for used cars is more like 11, 12%, 10 to 12%, again, based on credit standing. But those are really high. There's now almost 18% of all car financing represents payments of more than $1,000 a month. That's just staggering. Yeah. So that's one thing. Cost of financing has gone way up. Second thing is the sticker prices of the cars have gone way up. There's some tables that I produced in here that have inflation since changes in prices since the month before the pandemic. And they start on page 11. I go 11, 12, 13, 14, or something like that. And they're ordered. And this isn't every CPI component, but, so that I could sort of fit them on one page. They're certain ones. And there's some redundancy because there are broad classifications and then subclassifications within that. But if you look at page 11, which is everything that's risen in price by more than 25% since before the pandemic, so where we stand now, what it cost relative to pre-pandemic, you'll see a whole bunch of things that have to do with cars. So third one down is motor vehicle repair, up 40%. Used cars and trucks, up 37% since pre-pandemic. Motor vehicle insurance, up 34%. Motor vehicle maintenance and repair, up 30%. And then new and used motor vehicles. So that's a broader category that includes both the new and the used that I mentioned before. That's up 28%. So so the sticker prices are really high. Financing is really high. And then inventories continue to be relatively low. So cars on dealers' lots were very supply chain constrained. The auto strike didn't help that, but they have been coming up, but they're still nowhere near normal. So there's not like a whole lot of supply. It's very expensive, and financing costs are high. That is the interest rates are having more of a depressive effect than we had originally thought. And I think that's the main thing behind the shortfall in motor vehicle purchase and use. And that is the area of the T fund that really can represent more growth than a lot of the others, because it's an income-based thing. And it's typically on a higher growth path just because incomes grow and people need cars. So that, though, is a big chunk of the downgrade. The other is motor vehicle fees, and that's a head scratcher. We use the opportunity of these forecast updates to dig deeply into lots of things that come up as being anomalies and try to understand them. Sometimes a revenue shortage will be something like, oops, they put all the money in the wrong category for thus and such, and now they'll move it back out and then everything's fine. Or somebody was sick in the finance department or whatever, and they didn't, do a month's roll up of something, and, that comes back. We couldn't find anything like that going on. But in motor vehicle fees, one of the things we look at carefully are 1 and 2 year motor vehicle registrations, because you can get flips between years based on that. And there's a chart on page 33 that shows the share of 2 year vehicle registrations, share of total. I'll just give you a minute to flip there. And so these registrations, we were concerned that before the fee increases were going to take effect, that everybody knew they were going to happen, but before they took effect, that there might be a spike in 2 year registrations to lock in a lower rate, and that more people be taking advantage of that. But if you look at this historically, when they were first introduced in 1995, there were 7 or 8% of the population that said they'd like to opt for it. And then the next year, it was lower because all the people who were inclined to do that, or most of them, had done it the first year. So you get a lower percentage in the second year. Then it flips back and down and up and down. Then you'll see in 2000, it goes to almost zero. And that's because back in those days, they used to mail hard copy, snail mail, registration information and renewals, and that was the way you do it, or show up at DMV. And they forgot to print the 2 year option on the mailing. So guess what? There are almost no 2 year registrations that year. So obviously that was a big revenue hit. And the only ones that did register, it's not exactly zero, because some people did call up and say, what's with this? There's no 2 year and I want 2 year, and then they do it. But anyway, it was close to zero. So the next year it popped up with both the people from the year before that would have renewed and the ones that might have renewed there. But also there was a little bit of, if you take something away, it becomes more interesting. And I think the fact that it wasn't there caused that to even go a little bit higher. Anyway, you still get this 2 year pattern, kind of on, off for a few years. That diminishes over time because the novelty of it diminishes. But generally, it's on a bit of an upward trajectory. So from 7% in 95 up above 20% of late. So we thought these might really spike, heading into 2024 because of the fee changes. And we get these regular queries with transportation, and they changed over to a new computer system in November.
Yeah.
And they could not give us data past October. So this is what happens sometimes with new computer systems. And I'm sure it's going to be better in the long run. I think it's the same system Tax is using. And Tax has been phenomenal with the speed with which they can handle inquiries and process stuff. During this forecasting period, they'll get us stuff overnight. We'll put in, and weekends, we'll put in queries. We have some puzzle that we can't figure out, and they'll get us data on it right away. With transportation, it's usually months and months and months with the old system. I've got a pile of paper output from transportation in the early days in the barn that is just like stacks of paper, because nothing was really very electronic, and that's how they did it. But we'll be meeting with their computer people also to try to make clear the information we need, but they could not provide us data after October. So that last measurement there is the data through October, and you see it going up sharply, which is what we thought, but we're missing 2 months of the first half. The problem is, if that went up so much, there should be more money, not less, year to date, because the 2 year regs are more expensive. And so the fact that fees are a drag on the transportation fund is puzzling, and absent additional information that we can get from transportation, we had to treat it as real and lower that somewhat. So you're still going to have a lot of fee revenue in the second half of the year, and we'll see how that plays out. But one thing that was important, and this was discussed at the e-board yesterday, is, we always talk to people at the departments and that are processing, collecting the information and try to get their take on things. And there are people in finance at AOT who feel like it's been puzzling them too, why fee revenues have been so low. And one of them, Diane Coles, who's the finance director, she mentioned that as she goes to the supermarket or the hairdresser or whatever, she notices inspection stickers on cars and just tries to get a sense like how many are out of date. And
Yeah.
there was a staggering percentage. This is a small sample study, but it would be an easy survey to expand, very cheap, because you get pretty much random vehicles in various parking lots, and the inspection sticker you can identify pretty quickly. To do registrations, since there are no longer stickers on license plates, you would need a handheld device that connects to AOT, but that also could be done. You could check registrations also, but the inspection stickers she looked at, and I think during COVID, a lot of people dispensed with, you weren't going anywhere, so you weren't going to inspect your car, and you weren't driving very much, and but I think maybe people just ignored it after that, or I don't know. I think compliance though might be a real issue.
Yep.
And it wouldn't take much, or maybe even any money. Maybe everybody on the committee could do a survey for a week, all the places you go, and you'd get a statistically valid result from that. But it also, just for the inspection stickers, you could pretty quickly also have enforcement around it. But even the announcement that something was going to be done might shore up compliance, and that could be a problem. But I just pass that along because
We appreciate that. That's something that a few of us have been wondering about with the enforcement of inspection stickers. So it's really interesting that it rises to the level of your observation. Yeah.
yeah, and the finance people, because they're watching it too. They're not tasked with trying to analyze why. They're just processing the data, but they notice people that have been there for a while. And so that's also always a whole lot easier than raising a tax, is just to say, hey, we're just going to enforce the existing statute. And let's be fair, everybody who owes needs to pay. Anyway, that could be an issue affecting it. It might be that we would have a happy upgrade in the T fund by the end of the year because we find out something in the next few months that was missed. Wouldn't be the first time, but in the meantime, this is what the data is telling us, and it represents a slight downgrade to the fund. So that's pretty much it
Okay,
as an overview.
Wonderful. This is great. I think we have a couple questions in our room. Representative Shaw.
Thank you. Good morning, Tom. Thank you for the report. My question maybe concerns the Ed Fund just a little bit, because the Ed Fund gets quite a bit of funding out of the purchase and use tax. Is the amount small enough so that it doesn't create a blip, or do you have an opinion on that?
Excuse me. You mean a blip in the Ed Fund?
Yeah. Because the income will be down some. There's a number that it's going. We think there's a number that's going down.
Oh yeah, it definitely feeds into the Ed Fund, but the Ed Fund has a whole sales tax, as you know, and other components. So it's totally overshadowed by that. So it takes some off the Ed Fund, but not so much to be material.
Thank you.
Other questions? Did I see Senator Chittenden? No? Okay.
No,
Yeah,
yeah,
the ed fund sales tax also benefited from sales tax on cannabis, which is a little bit higher than was expected. So yeah, there's always the issue of like what stuff gets swapped between the various funds and why something like purchase and use ends up in the ed fund and all that. But yeah, that's always something to revisit.
So we have a question.
Well, maybe I.
Senator.
Yes, one of the things, the sales tax from cannabis was earmarked for after-school programs. But it all went in, because it was sales tax, it went into the ed fund. However, a number of our after-school programs are not operated by the local educational agencies. They are the Y, they are boys and girls or what, and some schools choose not to operate them. So we've actually had to create a special fund for that particular source of sales tax revenue because Act 60 prohibits expenditures out of the ed fund for anything other than what's specified. So it did create revenue into the ed fund, but that revenue is not available to support our K through 12 system. It was specifically designed at the time cannabis bill, which was controversial, got passed to help support the development and sustaining after school programs. I just want to clarify that sales tax into the ed fund from cannabis, because now it's going to go into a special fund and eliminate the problem that we encountered with this particular revenue source.
Good point.
So we have a question, Representative Pouch. Oh, no. So we had a question. It's not a question no, anymore.
So Chair Coffey,
Yes.
I do have a question, but I see your red light blinking. Do you all need to race, and I can ask it after you go off to the floor?
I think we are going to have to go off to the floor, but before we go, maybe Representative.
Yeah, just one quick question, Todd. You know, we're looking at the purchase and use tax of motor vehicles, and obviously that's on a decline. How does that relate to the housing market with the property transfer tax? Because obviously you have the same issues, high interest rates, low inventory. Do we see that same trajectory in the housing market?
Yeah, so again, it's not that it's on a downward trajectory. It's just relative to the last forecast, it's, being taken down. But yes, high interest rates really impact anything that involves borrowing. So the property transfer tax is down and was also lowered in this forecast. So that, that definitely has a huge impact in anything that's credit sensitive in housing, and big ticket items like cars are two of them.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So this is, Mr. Kvet, this has been really helpful, and we're, as a committee, we're very focused on this revenue downgrade. Hopefully it's just that we can figure out what that glitch is. If inspection solved it all, that would be a great thing, but we will have to see. So I'm sorry,
Please tell me if you get any new data from personal survey work, and I'll incorporate it.
This week, you'll see all of us are looking at cars. Well, thank you. And I sorry to have to run to the floor. So I will.
Thank you.
Okay, I think you might continue with our colleagues in the Senate for a little bit. So thank you for your time this morning.
Certainly.
May I ask a long-winded question, Tom?
Absolutely.
All right, so during your presentation, you indicated it was a little puzzling as to the registration fees. So first, it was sort of a statement, and I was putting pieces together, and I'd suspect it might be related to the purchase and use fees being down, the fact that people are buying less cars, meaning they're registering new vehicles, and just conjecturally, my personal surveying, I know a few friends that used to have 3 vehicles with high schoolers, but the pandemic really taught them that they can do a lot more things remotely, and they've gone down to 2 vehicle households, and they just have their kids not have a separate dedicated vehicle. So I'm wondering if that's part of it. But relatedly, my actual question to you is, with the purchase and use going down because of the drivers you indicated, increased prices, increased financing costs, and supply chain shortages, do you have reason to believe or suspect that this is a blip that next year that we should expect as the supply chain sort of corrects itself, as I see it starting to do so, as well as people needing to have to replace cars, that they're going to not be able to delay these purchase decisions? Do you anticipate that the purchase and use should rebound next year, or is it really a big open question to you?
No, it'll be coming back, but interest rates aren't dropping quickly. So again, relative to pre-pandemic times, still in fiscal 25, there'll still be relatively high interest rates. And so it's not like that disappears. And it's also not like we're likely to get a whole lot in the way of price declines. Actually, the rate of increase will definitely drop. And there should be some actual price decline also, but that just hasn't happened yet. So all those things are more favorable to it. And any downsizing that's happened, which is real, there's a limit to how much more of that can occur. But yeah, fewer miles driven, both because of remote work and because of an aging population, are factored into the analysis.
Thank you.
Tom, do you get data from DMV on the number of inspections?
Yeah, we can get, we break all that stuff out, but it's when there are interruptions in the flow of data, it really becomes problematic, because that's where we start. Just try to stay completely open-minded and say, what is the data saying? And, whatever it is, then explain it. And sometimes it's easy to explain and sometimes it's not. This one we get all of about 2 weeks from when the data is released for the first half of the fiscal year to go through,
Right.
500 models and all kinds of categories, and then chase down issues. Some of that we don't get to the bottom of before we have to present and provide numbers. So this is one of them. And I hope we know more in the coming months. If it's something huge, it'll probably show up in the revenues as things get corrected or whatever. If it's not, then what we're forecasting now might turn out to be close.
Okay, because I thought, and I just sent an email to DMV to see if we could get inspections and just compare that over 5 years, like in the number of vehicles. Like we could do the survey data that you requested, but we could also just ask them, does it look like there's less, we have the same number of cars, but less inspections? I mean, that's similar to why we had the Lieutenant Revelin in. It's like people are saying they're getting pulled over less, or they feel like there's less. That the data did bear that out. So I'd like to see that with inspections.
Yeah, like the governor said, it's not the top priority of law enforcement to be pulling people over for inspection, stuff like that. That's just, they've got more important things to do, and I understand that.
Right.
But this wouldn't take that level of an enforcement officer to do. You could have more of a meter maid type person doing just what Diane Coles did, go through parking lots and, identify vehicles that inspections are.
If only we had cameras that would read the license plate.
You can.
Yeah.
They do have a handheld. You have handheld device, she said, that can that if you type in the license plate number, can tell you whether the registration is valid. So that's registration. And typically we figure car counts based on registered vehicles. So then there's this part of it, like with population, that are illegal and they're still there. They're still on the street, but they may have expired. And then the inspections are a separate issue altogether. So both of those, are worth digging into, but the car counts can move in ways that are unexpected. And I think that's where compliance may be a part of it. And also a fairly easy way to get money compared to alternatives,
Maybe we'll just buy more electric bikes.
Right.
Right.
I don't know how much more time we have of you, sir, but may I ask another question?
Absolutely.
So yesterday, the Vermont Public Transportation Association presented to us a shortfall in public in funding for public transportation, and they put forward 4 primary ideas that came forward. One of them being an increase or a $5 per year surcharge or public transportation charge on our car registration fees to raise about $3 million. My question to you is, I know you aren't charged with bringing forward answers, but given the reduced car registration fees and the shortfall in the transportation fund, do you have any commentary on the possibility of looking at raising the registration fees to shore up some of the shortfalls in the transportation fund?
It's raised by $20 million.
Yeah, I think it's you know, that's primarily a political decision, you know, where to get money for something. But I will say that since the pandemic, public transportation has been highly stressed. And this is even more severe in urban areas. But if you look on those inflation charts, you know, that I have, we looked at the one that had the biggest increases. If you look at the one that has the biggest decreases or the smallest increases, public transportation's on that because they haven't been able to raise fees for that because ridership has been down. And so it becomes a more expensive option if it's not being used as much. And, you know, that's a political and social decision. It's like, what's the value of that? Does it exceed just what people are willing to pay who are riders? Does it need to be subsidized, and should it be subsidized in some way for other public benefit purposes? And, you know, where you get the money from, there can be lots of different things, you know, but, you know, registration fees is one possibility.
Thank you. So yeah, we have 5 minutes to our next agenda item. Are there any other questions for Mr. Cavett? So, Logan, the thing that you sent, did you send that just to me or to the whole committee?
Just to you and then to the House Chair.
Is that different than what Cavett and Carr presented, or it's just like a more
His
detailed?
information just in a little summary sheet.
It's just like a little more detailed, or I guess it's the same, it's just the transportation information.
Yeah, just
broken out.
translation. It should be in the specifics for the purchase and use, so like the difference between the July forecast and the January forecast, but it's all the information came from it.
Yeah. Do you mind sending it to Megan, and Megan, you can send it or post it just so people have it if they want it, because it's a little more detailed and easier to grab since it's transportation.
I can do that.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's all we have for you, Tom.
Thank you,
Great, well,
Tom.
thanks. If there are follow-up questions, feel free to be in touch.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Take care.
So we can adjourn for a break.
Who's coming in?
And, yeah.